Hello everyone, and welcome back to this latest edition of ServiceMaxLive. I'm Anthony Harris, and today we'll be looking at the concept of asset centricity and how various stakeholders across an organization can leverage asset and service data. I'm joined today by Sumer Dutta and Mark Wilding, who lead our product marketing and GCT, or Global Customer Transformation teams, respectively. Welcome to both of you, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Anthony. Good to be here.
So today's topic or focus is the recent ServiceMax point of view, the power of asset data, which itself is based on a research report recently conducted by Field Service News, looking at the flow of asset data horizontally across an organization. To help me explore this concept a bit more, as I said, we're joined today by Mark and Sumer, but I wanted to begin by, let's look at the actual idea of asset data. So Sumer, what do we actually mean by this?
That's a really good question, Anthony, because it's important to kind of really identify what we mean by the asset and then what kind of data is really relevant. Of course, in the language that we use, we're thinking of an asset as a critical object, something that drives results for the customer. Or maybe the other way of looking at it is, if that asset were to go down, the hardware, software, and all of the different components of it, what is the impact on the customer? So you can think of mission critical assets, things that if they go down have a very, very adverse impact. And then maybe not so mission critical, but if their performance is degrading, then the impact on the customer can be substantial. When we typically think of asset data, our mind usually gravitates to these ideas of sort of asset performance, something like a sensor would pick up, like a temperature, vibration, or something like that. And that's what you would think about as a sort of the first level of quantitative data. But there's other elements of asset data that are very relevant to specific stakeholders. So when we think about this idea of asset centricity, we're not only thinking about that first level of asset intelligence, whether it is the temperature, the vibration, the performance of the asset, but we're also thinking about several other categories. The second is some level of customer context. You know, how is that asset being used and adopted? What is the history of that asset in terms of what has happened on it, or from a service perspective? What sort of actions have been taken on that asset? You know, maybe there's been parts replaced, so there's components on that asset as well. And then where's that asset in the timeline? Is it an early stage asset where these things are normal and should be happening, or is it a later stage asset where some of these sort of implications or impacts are not in the spectrum of normalcy, if you will? So there's many different layers of asset data and the different elements of context that come into it. So I know it's a pretty simple thought process in terms of just data as being a few data points, but it really is in establishing the context that is very, very important for service providers and manufacturers alike.
And Mark, if I turn to you quickly, anything to add, or do you think Sumer has covered everything there?
Yeah, I think he's summed it up really. You know, obviously there's physical and soft assets in that asset sort of perspective as well. So there's obviously software as a service assets that relate to software. So being able to sort of visualize and manage and understand where they're hosted as well is equally as important.
Thank you. It's interesting, Sumer, that you mentioned service history there, but in the aforementioned Field Service News research, they also found that out of asset data, that was the most commonly shared across an organization. However, you mentioned some other things, such as entitlements, parts, contract coverage. These data sets can also be extremely valuable to, particularly perhaps to some of the non-field service personas within an organization, should we say. Could you give us a bit of an idea about what some of those stakeholders might look like and the value that some of these data points can bring to them?
Yeah, it's a good point, Anthony, about, you know, asset data. We covered the different levels of data. The one thing we didn't touch upon was the financial implications of it. So you talk about the coverage from a contract, it really determines the action on the asset based on what that coverage is and essentially who gets paid. Yeah, so who is charged for that, which is very, very important as well. When we think of the personas and the stakeholders who are sort of impacted by this concept of asset data or asset centricity, for us, it falls into sort of three primary buckets. The first is what would typically come to mind being the operational stakeholders. And these might be folks who are trying to do something on that asset, or with the information trying to act some change on the asset. So these would be your traditional service stakeholders, maybe someone in a contact center or technical support center, or field service technician, or maybe even someone in a depot fixing, repairing, updating, maintaining that asset. You might have some compliance related folks as well in this operational bucket, if you will. You might have some supply chain individuals who are thinking about what are the parts needed on this asset, and what do we need to do to make sure that it is up and running from a parts planning point of view. The second bucket is where we're really beginning to see more and more interest in this idea of asset data, is a commercial bucket. And so these are people who are looking to monetize the asset or the actions on the asset. So that could be people in sales. You could have your traditional equipment sales. You could have your service sales if your organization has those folks. And there are people who are either trying to sell contracts, attach those contracts, renew contracts. They could be working with marketing, who's running campaigns based on the age of the asset, the condition of the asset, the history of the asset, if you will. And then eventually it could be a group of account managements or customer success individuals who are working with a customer on validating the value that was delivered on that asset and potentially working on a renewal business case. So you can think about different commercial personas that would fall into that bucket who are looking to make money there, if you will. And then the third set are people who are strategic in nature. They're making decisions not just on one individual asset, but portfolios of assets, and thinking about where the company needs to go. So this could be your chief revenue officer who is looking to build sort of new revenue models, your chief compliance officer or operating officer who is trying to make sure that you have the right resources in place. And eventually someone like your CEO who has sustainability, profitability, all of those different goals in place, and need to maintain those with the portfolio of assets that are out there or are being designed for the future. So I guess someone from a product point of view could build in there. And if you look at that entirety, so all of this adds up to new revenue models and revenue growths, sort of efficiency from a margin point of view. And this concept that Mark can even talk about is this idea of whether it's customer lifetime value or asset lifetime value, maximizing the value of that asset, whether it's in the hands of a customer or in some industries where it's in your hands and you're trying to maximize the value as well.
So it sounds like organizations really are sitting on a huge amount of value in terms of this asset data then potentially.
Absolutely.
And Mark, that's probably a good opportunity to turn directly to you there, but I know you've up until very recently had experience leading digital transformation at a large service organization and leveraging that same asset data that we're referring to now. So perhaps you can tell us a bit from your firsthand experience, what role Service plays as the steward of asset data and some of the challenges that this creates when it comes to going digital.
Yeah, I guess if you consider let's talk about a physical asset for the purpose of this. Obviously, you have the whole life cycle where it's initially sold out into an account or a client, or it's brought into operations if it's your own asset that you're managing through like a rental business or something like that. And then at that point where it ships, it's manufactured, and it leaves the factory in a certain configuration, let's say. From that time forward up until the end of that product's life, its withdrawal and disposal, the iterations and the insights and the information that is associated with that asset are really maintained and upheld by the service organization, the people who are touching the asset, reconfiguring the asset, break, fix, repair, or selling contracts on the asset, or getting help desk and customer feedback related to the asset. So as that life cycle runs, which can be 15, 20, 30 years for some assets, you're building this constant evolving history associated with it. And therefore, the opportunities through those 30 years to keep touching the asset, touching the account, and sort of monetizing it. So it's really important that you, as a service organization, you create the environment and the culture to make sure you keep that information live and current and valid all the way through your interactions with the people and the asset itself, so that you can keep your business really current and up to date on what's happening. So the challenge, obviously, from a digitization point of view is historically we used to have brown folders, filing cabinets, lots of records. And if anyone wanted to go and do a deep dive into an asset and look at some of the interactions, activities or opportunities, it would be a huge a task to harvest all that data and mine that data. And in principle, somebody sitting with piles of paperwork and flip charts and Pareto analysis and trying to draw some meaningful insights out of handwritten carbon copy documents, etc. Mm-hmm. And you lose a lot of the structured format of that data. Obviously, as we move to digitization and people want to move to maintaining and capturing and recording that data in a digital format, then you move into other challenges. So as different actors interact with the asset, as different parts of the organization touch the account and the asset related data, if they've got different digitization platforms, that in itself can lead to challenges, because what we do then is we hide the data in a digital format and then we compartmentalize it within the native hosting application that data is sitting in. So again, the challenges with going digital is you really need to have an understanding of the strategy and the plan of what you're trying to use that data for. And therefore, then what you can do is look at a structured way in which you capture the data and correlate the data. So you may have multiple application solutions for capturing different data at different stages of a life cycle of a product, or different actors, whether it's a salesperson, an account manager, or a service or support organization. You need to be able to create a golden thread through your digital environment to be able to then link and draw that data into a consolidated view that you can then report and get insights to take business decisions and use that data in an actionable way. Obviously, the other alternatives is you try to look for platforms which offer as much of that hosting of that digital data all within the same sort of environment, because then it allows at least the removal of integrations and data transition and transfer between applications, and therefore the potential pitfalls that can happen with that as well. So all of these things have to be considered on a digital transformation journey.
Thanks, Mark. Well, I know both of you were the authors of our ebook, as mentioned, and there's lots of good content in there, and we could go on for far longer, but this was just a short introductory ServiceMaxLive today. So thank you both for joining us and talking through some of the details, and thank you to everybody who's registered and joined us live. The point of view, or our new ebook, The Power of Asset Data, full title, How Asset Data Drives Results for the Entire Business, is available now. We would encourage everyone to, of course, go and read it and hear more about what we've spoken about today. And for everybody who is registered today, we will, of course, share a link to that ebook as part of the thank you email. And as well as that, the research report that we commissioned with Field Service News is also available and will be referenced from the point of view of the ebook itself. So thanks again to Samir and Mark, and thank you everybody for joining.
Thank you.